Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Our panelists have presented a number of challenges, but still, there are still a lot of questions on the table and issues in need of further clarifications. On the sanctions side, sanctions sound simple, but can we say the same for their practical implementation? It is clear that there are inconsistencies and many gray areas. Therefore, it is vital to harmonize and align measures and guidance across jurisdictions. Setting sanctions may be a sensible measure, but ensuring they are effective would be most sensible. On the finance side, with the banks and capital providers' strict approaches, can we really blame the underwriters for their diminished appetite to underwrite price cap risks? Is this really surprising? Reinsurers are clearly sending the message of reduced capacity. Are they acting on justified grounds? The Russian-Ukraine war is still ongoing. The Black Sea Grain Initiative and the corridor is in operation with great uncertainty on its future. But vessels involved in the initiative are still operating under a warlike situation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are standing on an unstable ground yet again. Bouncing back from the negative repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are now faced with an even bigger challenge. Is this maybe a reminder to all of us that this geopolitical evolution, encompassing a hybrid war, necessitates an even greater response from our industry compared with the response to COVID-19? And with these general remarks, I will now turn to our panelists for a few questions. My first question is addressed to all panelists. Out of all the challenges and issues that you have referred to just now, which in your view was the most difficult one to deal with? And if I can start with Loucas, then Ilias, and then Konstantinos.
Thank you, Sophoclis. Hello, can you hear? The most difficult for us as ship owners, it was indeed the pandemic. The pandemic, it was global. It was the first time in our generation have experienced a pandemic, and it was so complicated in a way that you are not in control of anything. You are dependent of many jurisdictions, many regulations which they came afterwards. You are dependent of so many other third parties that you are not in direct control. And what it was extremely difficult, what we have faced, it was with the crew on board. The seafarers, we could not handle the seafarers the way we have been handling them on a regular services, etc. They suffer on board, especially mentally, and whatever help we were offering, it was not enough. The world there failed to support human beings as far as we are concerned, as a result of the pandemic, where it was extremely unfair on the seafarers. The other issue which it was extremely important, which all of us suffer, Sophoclis, is moving and supplying spare parts and other supplies to the vessels from various parts of the world. In view of the pandemic and the restrictions that were imposed, and airlines not flying, etc., that made it extremely difficult, which in effect it had a direct and indirect impact on the marine insurance perspective as well, which, as I mentioned earlier on in my very short briefing, if I call it presentation, I call it a briefing, is that the low sulfur fuel oil regulation, which came about in 1st of January 2020, and shortly after we faced the pandemic and the closures everywhere, where with the fuel, a lot of ship managers and ship owners, they have suffered damages to main engines and auxiliaries. And in view of the pandemic and the closure of the airports and airlines and ports, etc., you were not able to supply the spare parts needed timely. So you stuck on the port of refuge for so long, which as a result, you had substantial claims, which at the end of the day resulted to massive deductibles increase and premiums, etc., which whatever you say, the final impact, it goes back to the ship owner. And the ship owners are the ones, unfortunately, they are picking up the pieces financially, emotionally, and in all respects. So the pandemic, as far as the sanctions are concerned, yes, it's been a big, very difficult. Nobody likes to see wars, of course, especially nowadays. But the sanctions, it was not as big impact as far as we're concerned. The pandemic, the COVID was the issue. Then that's where, as I said earlier, that's where the panic was spread. Actions that were delayed to be taken and implemented. In the insurance perspective, I believe it was not a mutual, although the clubs would like to use the word mutual, it was not a mutual understanding and communication and action and proactiveness from their perspective, especially at the beginning. At the end, slowly, things have progressed and they got put in place. Costa, don't worry, we'll not engage in a big argument here. Because I would like to tell our other friends, P&I clubs who are listening, especially at the back, that we're happy with UK. So just Anna to make it a bit more humorous and for everybody. Yeah. So yes, I believe the pandemic, coming back to your question, Sophoclis, the pandemic was the hardest for all of us. It was a new experience for all of us. It was global. You relied on third parties. And I'm not going to repeat myself, that was the hardest we face. Thank you, Loucas. Ilias, from your perspective?
First of all, I'm glad that I'm not representing P&I here. So the biggest challenge, I mean, it's a good question, but what is not a challenge? Okay, war it was something that was put on the test. We were all sleeping tight that war wordings were there. They were very secure for everything. People thought that they were covered on some things which they weren't actually covered. So there was a challenge there. It was a big challenge for war and for the insurance industry in general. However, I have to commend, on the other hand, because if it wasn't for the insurance industry, a lot of things would not have happened, even during pandemic. Because I can understand the pains that an owner can go through when he has a damage or something, but if it wasn't for the insurers to compensate and being able to have everything moving, even the financing also of the ships were, because of insurance, they were live. So I would say that the biggest challenge, though, that I'm seeing now is that it's not there, though. I think, for me, the biggest challenge that we will face is the decarbonization. This is going to be a bigger mess than we would expect. And because this will have also an impact on the regulations, this will create, let's say, how can I say, polyglossia on the regulations. So I think the challenge will be there on the regulation side, on the decarbonization. And I think war now has matured. We all learned that it's not an issue anymore for war. And also the sanctions is just a burden for underwriters. That's what I keep saying. And there is I hear what you say, that there's not a lot of underwriters writing business now coming out from Russia or Ukraine or Belarus. However, can you imagine the amount of burden of work that they are saving by not doing it? So I sense, I'm not there, and I do not represent any company on this particular subject now, but I would sense that they are declining to insure those things just in order, let's say, to avoid the pitfalls of insuring something which was sanctioned, which will have an impact on their finances, on their ESG, or your sustainability insurance, on everything. It will have across the board a huge impact. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ilias. Konstantinos?
Yes, well, I would say that as far as P&I clubs are concerned, we go hand to hand with ship owners. So I would say that, yes, the COVID-19 impacted more, our daily operations and trying to find ways to assist and dealing with different jurisdictions, different regulations, even in some places around the world, different ports of the same country had different regulations to deal with COVID-19. So it was very, very difficult. And as far as sanctions are concerned, the mechanism is there, and I believe that, apart from the essence, it's just another bureaucratic thing to be done. And nowadays we do have the tools, and we do have, to make sure that we do our due diligence properly and timely. Now, the war in Ukraine impacted us and members, and unfortunately, I would say, a member of ours with 2 vessels found, his first vessel called Ukraine on the 18th of February 2022, and his second vessel on the 20th of February 2022. So you may appreciate that this operation was almost destroyed, and I think very, very recently did member owner manage to be compensated by his war underwriters. On this case, actually, we assisted the member as far as legal issues were concerned, to deal with the war underwriters. But I will agree with Mr. Hamatsos that COVID-19 operationally, at least for us, was let's say a huge mess.
Okay, thank you to all 3 of you. Let me go to my second question, and this goes to Loucas. Loucas, as a ship owner, you mentioned that marine insurers, they did not act promptly. They introduced stricter policies. But what about the sanctions element? What about the oil cap? How do you cope with this internally as a company?
With the sanctions?
Yes.
We simply don't go there. That's
Okay.
the best way to keep out of it.
Okay.
But yes, what I said, just not to be misquoted here. I mean, over the years, the insurance and the underwriting in the marine industry with the ship owners, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So you have to have insurance. And over the years, I must say that the cooperation with everybody has been very good. It's a competitive industry. But what I'm trying to say is that even nowadays, Sophoclis, we live in 2023. And we, in many conferences, in many seminars, we talk about loss prevention, we talk about proactiveness, we talk about, taking measures and steps and this. And yet, in my view, there is always the way of, you find the humans, they find themselves unprepared, or it's a new experience, there are delays, there is confusion, there was a panic, and that, including with look at the sanctions now. You go to apply to your war underwriter, it has a huge questionnaire with various requirements. You speak to the loss of hire, completely different. You speak to the hull, who come into the hull, Ilias, it's not just the P&I clubs were a bit disappointed, it's also the hull. So, so we go to the hull underwriters, the same, no uniform criteria for the same reason, the same question, the same purpose. And then, why? Why to create such delays? Confusion, and then that has effect on your commercial business. For example, you get an inquiry from the charter to say, can you trade there? And then you have to put it through your insurance underwriters. And each one of them, they have a different requirements through their questionnaires, etc. And there is no uniformal. And one says A, the other one says B, and then, as always, it's up to the owners to make the decision. Plus, we have the banks, especially when the ships are on mortgage. There's another element to consider. So these are not helping the industry, our unique industry, to be honest with you. So, the answer for me is you don't go there. You avoid the headache.
A harmonized system.
Yes, a harmonized system, that would be the best way for everybody. Because like that, everybody will know, the requirements, and they know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Huh?
Okay, thank you, Loucas. Can I now turn to Ilias and Konstantinos for my third question? Ilias, which sector of the marine insurance industry do you feel has faced the biggest challenges? Was that hull, war, or P&I?
War, the obvious one, war, but I think that the exposures were not so big at the end. And the grain corridor helped a lot on that. P&I, of course, was, and I don't want to tread on yours, but because of COVID, of course, the crew element and the repatriating crew and so on would have been a huge issue. And we heard rumors about some silly money for one crew member to go out. For hull, pandemic was very benign for us, the claims. I think for hull, in the future, we will face huge challenges. The problem with hull was that the market was extremely low. The premium for hull were very, very low, were fairly unsustainable in a sense, which led a lot of companies pulling out from hull. And this happened especially during pandemic. We had a lot of companies pulling out from hull because of the lack of sustainable premium. This also drove premiums up, and because of the coincidence of the pandemic, of course, this helped a lot. On the 2020 fuels, we had claims, of course, but not on the greater scale, not as much as we should have expected. So it was within reason. So I would say that for hull, it still is a fairly calm water, apart from war, of course.
Konstantinos?
Yeah, I would say yes, war, obviously, but, there were how many vessels, Ilias? 80, you said?
Now it's 80. They used to close to 100 when it started.
100 vessels. So, yes, the IG clubs, they deal with 90%, 95% of the whole fleet, okay, of worldwide fleet. So I would say that P&I was not affected, in a bad way, but was more, let's say, involved on a day-to-day operation with ship owners. As I said, we went together, and actually both ship owners and the clubs were in uncharted waters, and we were learning together. We exchanged information, and we tried to cope with the emerging situations, either when it came for the COVID-19 era or the war in Ukraine, and even more for the 2020 Sulfur Cup, because we were ready, we were expecting things to happen that fortunately did not happen. Actually, the industry went better than it's supposed to be, and I think this is a result of close cooperation of many organizations, ship owners and insurers, not the bunker providers, but all the rest all together sat down, and I think we did it well. And saying we, I mean the whole industry, not only insurers.
May I add something on that?
Yeah.
Is that the typical model of client and insurer is fading away. Nowadays, the underwriters and insurers they are treated with the owners as the risk on the risk management side. We are partnering on the risk side because whatever risk the owner is facing, we are facing also. So, and I see that we don't see anymore our our clients as clients anymore, the typical sense of a client. Yeah. We participate on the risk selection. We participate on the risks that you undertake. And where the whole aim is to be able to offer, at the end of the day, a more sustainable premiums for you, to be more profitable, the business, and also to have as less claims as possible.
Any comments on this, Loucas?
Yes, respectfully, Ilias, I see what you're saying, but from the ship owner's perspective, we like to see the underwriters, and I mean all, not just hull and war or P&I, not to hide too much behind their insurance. So you are taking the risks, however you are covering your risk. The reinsurance in the last 2-3 years, the ship owners, they have paid record premiums on reinsurance. Am I right or wrong? Yes?
P&I.
So, and I believe the insurance industry, which is one of the oldest in the world, we're going back to the Lloyd's coffee shop and, back in the 1800 in London, they should have a bigger voice as far as I'm concerned. They should have a bigger voice. They can lobby between themselves. They can have a bigger voice. They have, over the years, supported the owners and the industry. They have invented covers, additional covers and everything. But as we all know, all this is at that cost. Yeah. Nothing is free. So the owners expect their underwriters to be a bit more fighters for them. Of course, we have to pay. Of course, you will follow the market, but we want them to be a bit more fighters. So the risks can be much more fair for the ship owner's perspective. And as I said, without talk too much, I believe that less hiding behind reinsurances, because they should have taken the risk as well, not just everything to be reinsured. Thank you.
It's not hiding behind reinsurance, because I'll give you an example. The sanctions is the law. You can't go against the law. So if, for example, you are based in Japan, for example, I'll give you an example. You're based in Japan, where the sanctions don't exist there, but the insurers of the Japanese are American, they won't be able to support that. And they are not hiding behind that, because in order for an underwriter to provide a competitive premium at the end of the day to the owner, requires to have a sound reinsurance. So it goes hand in hand. It's a chicken and the egg here all the time. So I would say that for hull, at least, hull underwriters, despite the fact that the values of the vessel has gone up and up and up and up, the policy deductibles remain fairly stable. It hasn't been, except you have a $100 million vessel with $200,000 deductible, 500, no more than that. So deductibles also are helping in this situation. But we can all disagree forever, I understand.
Yes. At the end of the day, we are all on the same side.
We're on the same side, because without ship owners, we don't have insurance. And cargo underwriters, we haven't touched upon cargo underwriters. They have suffered a lot.
Okay, thank you to all three of you. As a means to bring our panel discussion to a close, let us have a short closing remark by all. And I would like to focus on what, in your view, lies ahead from now on. What can we learn from this unprecedented situation, and what do you feel needs to be done further to deal with the uncertainty? If I can start with Konstantinos on this.
What lies ahead is problem, as usual. And, as Ilias mentioned before, the biggest one is the decarbonization and the uncertainty on what kind of fuels and actually on what kind of engines ship owners will invest in order to be able, to trade in the future and be able to find cargoes to load, etc. Now, everything is volatile, but, lessons learned is, we managed somehow to cooperate closer, and I think this is the outcome, the good outcome of this. And we managed to cooperate, we managed to adapt and I think in the future we'll be able to adapt on a more timely basis. And actually, those years gave us the opportunity to get to know our members and clients better, come together, discuss, bridge our differences, and try to find a solution that is viable for all parties. Maybe sometimes we didn't find the solution, but still the discussion was there and the dialogue was there. So I think that's a very good thing, because I've been in insurance since 2009. And I think it's the very first time that I see so many people coming together and starting discussing. And this started only back in 2021, I would say, not earlier. So this is a good outcome out of those calamities, in brackets, that actually we have been facing since 2020.
Thank you. Loucas, your final comments on this?
Yeah. As far as the underwriters are concerned, the marine insurance, my dear Sophoclis, the message is, respectfully, less restrictive clauses, more competitive premiums, and raise your voice, to regulators, so we have, for better coverage. And so this wonderful industry is unique. It will carry on for many, many thousands or millions of years. So uncertainty, you mentioned uncertainty. The word speaks for itself, uncertainty. And as we said earlier on, that despite the fact that we live in 2023, yet situations, they find the humans unprepared, despite all the expertise, the technology, and whatever this planet Earth have invested in, still there are loose ends. They find us all by surprise. That we don't know. I hope I will retire soon. But tough days ahead, there's no doubt about it. Now we see the interest rates are going up. Mm-hmm. Ship financing is getting harder and harder. We see the regulators coming from, from the IMO and the other national and international. I believe that, respectfully again, future regulations and existing regulations to be much more clear and not to leave great areas. We're talking, my dear friend Kostas mentioned earlier on, and Ilias, about the fuel going forward. Yet, we had discussions and conferences recently about 2030, even up to 2050. And at the moment, we have not a clear direction what fuel we're going to use, what type of fuel. So I hope that the solutions, step by step, they will come along, and good suggestions and recommendations that will become policies, and hope a better future for our marine industry. But I cannot predict anything that. We have seen everything in the last 5 years, so I will not commit to anything other than that. Thank you.
No forecasting. Ilias?
The biggest risk, I think, is, apart from giving headline decarbonizations or anything, is the urgency. We put too much strain now to the ship owners to change this, change that, change the other, on an urgently. This is the perfect recipe for accidents, of course. So that's what I sense myself, because a friend of mine was saying the other day that this is the first time that changes are not dictated by technology, but from people demanding technology to change. So, which makes it extremely risky as we go forward. So, in general, I can sense, let's say, the unpredictability. We are here to cover risk. We are here to cover uncertainty. That's the whole idea of insurance. We don't insure certainties. But again, I'm hopeful because shipping is resilient. Shipping has survived many, many centuries, and will survive for the times to come.
Okay. Thank you to all three of you. If I could turn now to our audience, and are there any questions or comments that anyone would like to raise with our panelists?
Yes, Sophoclis, there are two questions. Basically, playing devil's advocate. in both questions. Okay. This is something that was also raised at the ICS Marine Insurance Committee, was something that was discussed. Where is the fine line between sanctions, restrictions, APs, stop being of benefit and effective, and they're prompting people, ship owners especially, to go dark? Are the sanctions and the restrictions, do you think, Ilias, this is for you, are the sanctions and the restrictions becoming a bit too much to the point that more people, if this continues, you feel that more people, if it becomes uneconomical for them or tempting or whatever the word is, that prompts them to go dark and be tempted? And of course, then we have a situation where who picks up the bill if these people are prompted to go and insure with substandard insurers, for instance? Then who picks up the bill? You mentioned Malaysia, the Malaysian government will pick up that bill, for instance.
Look, each underwriter considers his pricing. When he's pricing a risk, he has his own elements and building blocks. When you are building a premium, you have your own building blocks to satisfy your shareholders, your profits, your reserves, most probably reserves. So sanctions, on the other hand, it's not something that we as underwriters impose. We get hit by that. For example, the cost of monitoring sanctions is considerable. The cost of running this type of databases, that they cost a few $100,000 per year, and the people that they are involved, is a huge cost. So this cost has to be covered. Who's covered? The customer will cover that cost. We bear a lot of cost, of course, but which is, again, is not a cost that we can actually pass it on to reinsurers or anybody. Only the clients can go there. So there is a cost element. So there is an inflation in itself. On the other hand, encouraging people to go dark, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the ethos that every ship owner should have. Either you have your own ethos, if you go dark for money, for sure. But when you go dark, in jeopardy is the crew. It's not, set aside hull, engines, or whatever. It's the crew. The crew goes on board. This particular Pablo case, the vessel was in ballast. Whoever is a tanker owner would know. The vessel was not inerted, or the inert system wasn't working. If it had a half-decent classification, society would have picked up that something's wrong with the inert gas and wouldn't allow the vessel to sail. So I'm just saying that we are not here to penalize owners. On the contrary, we are here to work with owners, and we are trying to weave ourselves away from those particular sanctions. So it's a bit unfair for underwriters because they do work very hard to insure all our clients.
The gentleman at the back.
Yeah.
Hello. There we are. Yeah, Mark Matthews, West of England P&I Club. Really, to my good friend Loucas, I suspect you might have been being a bit provocative and poking the bear a little bit to get some dialogue going. But I think really on behalf of the P&I industry, I would certainly support some of the comments that Konstantinos and Ilias have said in defending our position as marine insurers. I think just harking back to COVID-19, I mean, it was something unusual, unprecedented, and something that perhaps as an industry as a whole took a while to get to grips with. So miracles we can deal with, the impossible takes a little bit longer. But what I would say is that as far as the COVID-19 claims are concerned, the West have paid out a total of $40 million. All of those claims were within our $10 million retention. So I'm sure my colleagues at the other P&I clubs have very similar positions. So I think we did step up. So I just would like just to leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay. Statement.
Was this just a statement, or you need a comment?
just a statement. Yeah, perhaps Mark there, because he knows me well.
Okay.
We have different of opinions.
Okay, any more questions?
Yeah, thank you. Dieter Rodenberg from Intership. First of all, guys, I envy you for these nice chairs that you have there next year. Next time I want to sit there as well. I think one of the subjects that is missing from the headline and what you haven't discussed is the nuisance of drug trafficking and the fallout from that. I think that's something may not have been so important over many years, but the last few years, 2 years maybe or longer, it's become more and more of an issue. So much so that the P&I clubs decided to make the payment of fines or recovery of fines discretionary. And I think that's something that we will be seeing more and more in the future. So maybe could have been addressed here as well. But I have a question with regards to regulation, and I'm not sure if anyone of the two of or maybe Ilias can respond to that. The ETS that we will see coming into force next year in the EU will basically make the DOC holders liable to pay for the emission certificates. That is potentially very huge exposure to some ship managers. And I'm wondering whether there's any thought on whether there will be insurance cover for this, or if this is just a commercial risk that people have to take.
Any easier question? Do you have any easier question? The only thing I can say, because I don't expect, there should be products eventually when this thing comes around that will provide some insurance for that. The whole idea of this ETS is to provide capital, of course, for further investments to be invested again to shipping. So I don't actually have an answer for that, to be fair, but I would expect that if there is a risk element for owners, which it resembles more to a credit risk, I would suggest that most probably there should be some products arising out of that.
Okay. If I may, to add something about, try to respond to your question as far as drugs trafficking is concerned. I would say, yes, you're right. We see a rise. And we as club, as the UKPN club, we have dealt with several cases of drugs. And the problem is that, we don't have nowadays, of course, Latin America is, the main, as far as cocaine is concerned, at least, exporter of drugs to Europe and to the States. Unfortunately, when we come to technical issues, we have realized, and it is not us as club, but also the authorities realized that drug traffickers are always, I would say, not one, but 2 or 3 steps ahead from us and from loss prevention. And unfortunately, if the drugs are found, it heavily depends on what jurisdiction the drugs are found. For example, there are jurisdictions that, I will give you an example without giving you the name of the vessel. The vessel sailed a port from South America. The drugs were found when the ship prior to departure. The drugs were discharged. The vessel went somewhere in the world, and unfortunately, authorities didn't manage to find, I think, 5 kilos out of 800 kilos. So the crew members were arrested, they were put in jail, and unfortunately, they are still in jail. And they have been in jail for a year, in a very peculiar, I would say, jurisdiction in the world. So this is something that we try, what we recommend, what we suggest is, be vigilant, and I would say as a practical measure, the only thing that you can do now is diving inspection, which is again not 100% sure, because maybe the divers themselves that you actually ask to do the diving inspection, maybe they will let's say, put the drugs under kill. So it is a very complex system, a problem, a very complex one, and we're trying to deal with that as far as loss prevention is concerned. And I think all clubs do the same. We try to provide our members with practical advice. But still, as far as I've seen, unfortunately, drug traffickers are a way ahead of us. We do something, they do things that we will think of, let's say, next week, and then when we reach there, they would do something else. They even, have submarines or whatever to do that. I don't know if I actually responded to your inquiry. It is something that we have noticed, and it is something that we have been working a lot with that. And I would say that I don't know if you're aware of loss prevention of the UK PNI Club has a department, let's say, within the department called Signum, which is manned by ex-Scotland Yard officers that actually travel to Latin America and, in cooperation with the authorities, try to figure out ways to protect the vessels.
Okay, any more questions? Fred Kenny, can we have the microphone here?
Okay. Is that working? Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. Fred Kenny, Director of Legal Affairs and External Relations. Sorry, Fred Kenny, Director of Legal Affairs and External Relations at IMO. Just following on to Mr. Karavasilis' last comment, one of the things that the IMO is developing right now is guidelines on the fair treatment of seafarers in criminal cases. And with drug cases in particular, one of the things that we're seeing that's, to me, is very concerning is masters being held liable for drugs being found on their vessels solely because they are the master. And the legal theory is that if they're the master, they're responsible for everything. And that has resulted in a number of masters being imprisoned awaiting trial for extended periods of time, and they're almost invariably acquitted because there's no evidence to show that they knew that the drugs were on board. So the IMO is looking at that very carefully, and I hope that we'll be able to find solution to some of these cases because I think it really impacts the industry and impacts the ability to attract people to the profession if they can be held criminally liable for something that they had absolutely no knowledge of. Thank you.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Any more comments or questions? No? Okay. Well, this brings us to the end of our panel discussion. Can I just have a round of applause for our panelists? And thanks to our delegates for your participation. Thank you, and please stay tuned for session 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.